The Hegemony Council chamber had been designed to inspire awe and terror in equal measure. Carved from a single crystalline asteroid and suspended in the void above the capital world of Dominion Prime, it represented the pinnacle of imperial power. The 12 council members sat in their elevated positions, their diverse alien physiologies unified only by their absolute authority over trillions of lives across the galaxy. Today, that authority was crumbling. High Counselor Morthek, his ceremonial robes trembling with barely controlled rage, activated the central holographic display. What appeared was a nightmare of red warning indicators, communication dead zones, and system failures that spread across the galactic map like a plague. Explain this, he commanded in the harmonic voice that had ordered the destruction of entire worlds. Sub-Counselor Velthrix, responsible for military operations, consulted her data streams with increasingly rapid movements of her tentacle appendages. High Counselor, we are experiencing what can only be described as systematic infrastructure collapse. 317 star systems have reported communication failures. 148 sector fleets have lost contact with command authority. Productivity quotas have been missed in over half our territories. Sabotage, growled Counselor Thekaran, his massive form bristling with aggression. Find the perpetrators and make examples of them. That's the problem, Velthrix replied, her voice taking on an unusual tremor. We can't identify specific perpetrators. The failures appear to be spontaneous, coordinated only by timing rather than central command. Our intelligence networks report simultaneous uprisings on worlds that have no communication with each other. High Counselor Morthek's crystalline eyes focused on the tactical display with growing unease. In his 3 centuries of rule, he had never seen anything like this pattern. Rebellions were expected, they were even useful, providing opportunities to demonstrate hegemony strength. But this wasn't rebellion in any recognizable form. This was something that seemed to emerge from the very structure of their empire itself. Where did this begin? He demanded. We're attempting to trace the origin point, Velthrix reported. Initial analysis suggests the disruption began in Sector 7 Alpha, specifically around the human colony of New Terra. However, the timeline is ... problematic. Elaborate. The cascade appears to have begun before the fleet under Commander Zethkar made contact with the colony. Somehow, the effects preceded the cause. The council chamber fell silent except for the ominous hum of failing systems. Even the hegemony's most advanced technology seemed to be developing problems. Status lights flickered inconsistently. Holographic displays showed subtle distortions. The quantum communication network that connected them to their vast empire carried increasing amounts of corrupted data. Contact Commander Zethkar immediately, Morthek ordered. I want a full report on the situation at New Terra. The communication attempt failed, then it failed again on the 3rd attempt. They achieved a partial connection, but the signal was so degraded that only fragments came through. ... impossible tactical situation? ... using asteroids as ... the quantum interference unprecedented. ... they're not fighting like any... The signal cut out entirely, leaving the council staring at static. High Counselor, reported Sub-Counselor Nidal from his monitoring station. I'm receiving an incoming transmission on all channels. Origin point unknown. Encryption protocols ... done. It's being broadcast in clear text across the entire network. Display it, Morthek commanded. Though something in his ancient instincts screamed warnings, the static cleared, revealing a human male sitting in what appeared to be a simple office. He was middle-aged by human standards, unremarkable in every way except for his eyes. Those eyes held something that made High Counselor Morthek's millennia of experience suddenly feel insufficient. Good afternoon, the human said pleasantly. My name is Director Marcus Chun, representing the Free Worlds Coalition. I believe we need to have a conversation. Morthek's voice carried the full weight of imperial authority as he responded. Human, you are addressing the Hegemony Council. You will show proper respect or face the consequences of your insolence. Chun's expression didn't change, but somehow his smile seemed to deepen. High Counselor Morthek, with respect, I think the time for threats has passed. Your fleet commanders can no longer reach you. Your sector governors are dealing with situations they don't understand. Your productivity quotas aren't being met because the people you enslaved are no longer working for you. Each statement hit the council like a physical blow because, impossible as it seemed, each one was demonstrably true. The evidence was displayed on every screen in the chamber and empire in systematic collapse. What do you want? Morthek asked, his voice losing its imperial resonance. I want you to understand something. High Counselor, Chung replied, settling back in his chair with the casual confidence of someone holding all the cards. For 1,000 years, the hegemony has maintained power through a very simple principle: make resistance seem hopeless. Isolate your enemies? Overwhelm them with superior technology. Convince them that submission is survival. The holographic display shifted to show the galactic map, but now the red indicators were moving, forming patterns that spoke of coordination and purpose. The chaos that had seemed random was revealing its underlying structure, a carefully orchestrated campaign that spanned hundreds of star systems. The problem with this approach, Chun continued, is that it only works if your enemies accept the rules of the game. But what happens when they stop playing by your rules entirely? Behind Chun, the image expanded to show representatives of dozens of species, some that the hegemony had supposedly conquered decades ago, others that had never been encountered before. Each one radiated the same quiet confidence that Chun displayed. Impossible, Sub-Counselor Velthrix whispered. Our integration protocols are perfect. Conquered species cannot coordinate resistance. They lack the communication networks, the resources, the hope? Chun interrupted gently. You're right that conquered species can't coordinate resistance using traditional methods. Good thing we taught them non-traditional methods. The display zoomed in on specific systems, showing activities that defied every principle of space warfare the hegemony understood. Asteroid belts moved with purpose, forming defensive patterns around inhabited worlds. Debris fields created communication relays that operated outside known technology. Most disturbing of all, ships appeared and disappeared from sensor range as if they were phasing in and out of normal space itself. How? Was all Morthek could manage? High Counselor, let me tell you about warfare as humans understand it, Chun said, his voice taking on the tone of a teacher addressing students. We didn't learn to fight in the sterile environment of space, with clear battle lines and recognizable tactics. We learned to fight on a single world where everything was a potential weapon and survival depended on constant adaptation. One of the figures behind, Chiun stepped forward, a Vectari whose crystalline features caught the light in impossible patterns. When they spoke, their voice created harmonics that made the council chamber's walls vibrate. We can travel between stars without ships, the Vectari said. For 6 months, we carried word of human resistance to every conquered world we could reach. We shared information. We shared hope. We shared the knowledge that the scattered could become strong if they worked together. Another figure approached, a massive creature whose scarred hide spoke of a lifetime of violence. Its voice was a subsonic rumble that made the station's superstructure groan. My people know the deep places where your ships cannot go, the creature said. We built supply caches in the darkness between worlds. Communication relays. Meeting places where the survivors could plan. Chung gestured to each speaker in turn. Every species in the galaxy has unique abilities, High Counselor. For 1,000 years, the hegemony has suppressed those abilities, forced conformity, eliminated diversity. You've been trying to rule a galaxy full of specialists by pretending they're all the same. The implications crashed over the council like a tidal wave. The hegemony's strength had always been its uniformity standard tactics. Standard responses, standard solutions to every problem. But they were facing an enemy that thrived on diversity, that turned every unique capability into a weapon. Your empire is already gone, Chun said quietly. Your fleets are isolated and confused. Your communication networks carry more resistance messages than official orders. Your conquered worlds are no longer sending tribute because they're no longer afraid. On the display, System after system displayed the same pattern hegemony forces surrounded by impossible tactical situations, cut off from support, facing enemies that fought using methods no military academy had ever theorized. But here's the truly beautiful part, Chun continued, and his smile became something that made the High Counselor's ancient bones ache with dread. We didn't beat you with superior technology or overwhelming force. We beat you with something much simpler. Which is? Morthak asked, though he was no longer sure he wanted to know the answer. We taught people that resistance was possible, Chun said. For 1,000 years, the hegemony convinced species that surrender was survival. We simply demonstrated that cooperation. The emergency council session convened aboard the Dominion's Will 3 hours after Chun's transmission ended. Zethkar found himself facing his senior staff in the war room, their various alien physiologies creating a rainbow of anxiety across the polished metal table. Sub-Commander Crystal scales had darkened to their stress coloration, while Navigator Thulwen's tentacles writhed in barely controlled agitation. Report, Zethkar commanded, though his own voice lacked its usual authority. Communications are problematic, sir, reported Lieutenant Vashti, her insectoid antennae twitching rapidly. We've lost contact with 7 border patrol units in the past hour. Additionally, our quantum entanglement network is experiencing unprecedented interference patterns. Zethkar's mandibles clicked sharply. The quantum communication network was supposedly unbreakable instantaneous messages across any distance, impossible to intercept or jam. It was the technological backbone that made hegemony control of vast territories possible. Elaborate, he ordered. The interference doesn't match any known phenomenon, Vashti continued, consulting her datapad with shaking appendages. It's as if someone is deliberately introducing chaos into the quantum matrix. Our messages are getting through, but they're changed. Changed how? Vashti hesitated before activating the holographic display. A standard military transmission appeared, but as they watched, portions of the text began shifting. Status reports transformed into casualty lists. Supply requisitions became desperate pleas for reinforcement. Coordination orders evolved into contradictory commands that would send fleets to empty space. This is impossible, Sub-Commander Crystal breathed, his scales now a deep purple that indicated complete terror. The quantum encryption protocols are apparently not as secure as we believed, Zethkar finished grimly. Sir, Navigator Thulwen spoke up, his voice barely above a whisper. There's more. Long-range sensors are detecting massive displacement signatures throughout the sector. Ships moving without energy signatures. Massive objects appearing and disappearing from sensor range. Zethkar felt his certainty crumbling piece by piece. Everything about this situation violated fundamental laws of physics as the hegemony understood them. Show me. The holographic display shifted to a tactical overview of the local star system. What they saw defied every principle of space warfare that had governed galactic conflict for millennia. Instead of the orderly formations of traditional fleet engagement, the sensors showed chaos. Ships appeared from nothing, existed for moments, then vanished again. Energy readings spiked and disappeared. Most disturbing of all, some of the contacts were massive, far larger than any known vessel class. Analysis suggests the large contacts may not be ships at all, Thulwen reported. His tentacles now wrapped tightly around his own body in a defensive posture. Mineral composition indicates. Asteroids? Debris fields? But they're moving under intelligent control. The realization hit Zethkar like a physical blow. Humans weren't just using unconventional tactics, they were using the environment itself as a weapon. He had spent decades studying military doctrine, strategic theory, and conquest psychology. Nothing in his experience had prepared him for an enemy that could weaponize empty space itself. A soft chime indicated an incoming transmission. The viewscreen activated to show Director Chun again, but this time the human wasn't alone. Behind him, Zethkar could see figures representing at least a dozen different species, some he recognized as supposedly conquered peoples. Others he had never seen before. Good afternoon, Commander, Chun said pleasantly. I hope you've had time to consider our earlier conversation. What are you doing to our communications? Zethkar demanded. Chun's expression remained maddeningly calm. We're simply sharing information, Commander. Your quantum network carries a great deal of traffic, and we found it remarkably useful for spreading news. Amazing how quickly word travels when people learn the truth about hegemony integration policies. One of the figures behind Chun stepped forward, a Vectari. Recognizable by their crystalline skin and ability to survive in hard vacuum. When they spoke, their voice carried harmonics that made the ship's hull vibrate. Commander Zethkar, the Vectari said, I am Scout Prime Velthara. You may remember my homeworld Kepler 442b, population 8 billion when you arrived. Population 3 million when you left? Zethkar's forearms locked at his sides. He remembered the Vectari integration. It had been one of his most efficient operations, minimal resistance, swift submission, optimal resource extraction. A perfect example of hegemony methodology. Your people submitted according to protocol. He stated Velthara's crystalline features somehow managed to convey bitter amusement. We submitted because we believed your promises of peaceful coexistence. We believed that compliance would protect our families. The Vectari's voice took on a harmonic that made every piece of equipment on the bridge vibrate ominously. We learned better. Hyun gestured to another figure, this one an enormous creature that Zethkar didn't recognize. Its hide was scarred and pitted, suggesting a lifetime of violence, and when it moved, the ground shook. This is Warsinger Thokron of the Deep Reaches, Chun said. His people were told they were too primitive for hegemony integration. They were relocated to asteroid mining operations instead. The creature's voice was a subsonic rumble that made Zethkar's bones ache. My children work in the dark places now. They mine metals for hegemony ships while their own bodies waste away in artificial gravity. Many thousands have died. More die each cycle. One by one, Chen introduced representatives of a dozen species. Each one told a similar story: promises broken, populations decimated, cultures destroyed. But what disturbed Zethkar most was not their anger, but their composure. These were not the broken, desperate survivors he was accustomed to dealing with. These beings radiated a quiet, terrible purpose. What is the point of this exhibition? Zethkar asked finally. Education, Chun replied simply. For too long, the hegemony has relied on isolation to maintain control. Conquered species were kept separate, prevented from comparing notes, encouraged to believe their suffering was unique and unavoidable. His expression hardened. That ends now. The view screen split into multiple feeds, showing similar gatherings on different worlds. Zethkar recognized at least 6 systems that were supposed to be under secure hegemony control. In each location, mixed groups of species stood together, sharing information, coordinating activities. Impossible, Sub-Commander Krikstal whispered from behind Zethkar. Our security protocols were designed by conquerors to control the conquered. Chun interrupted, apparently having heard the comment through their communication link. But here's what your species never understood about warfare, Commander. It's not really about weapons or ships or technology. It's about will, and will is contagious. As if to demonstrate his point, the tactical display began showing new contacts throughout the star system. But these weren't the chaotic, impossible sensor readings they had seen before. These were coordinated movements, a complex dance of ships, asteroids, and energy signatures that spoke of careful planning and perfect timing. What are you doing? Zethkar demanded, though he was beginning to suspect he didn't want to know the answer. We're implementing a new strategy, Chun said. For 1,000 years, the hegemony has conquered by making resistance seem hopeless. You isolate your targets, overwhelm them with superior technology, and convince them that submission is survival. The human smile returned, and once again Zethkar felt that chill of genuine fear. But what happens when resistance isn't hopeless anymore? The answer came in the form of proximity alarms throughout the ship. Zethkar's crew scrambled to their stations as tactical displays lit up with contact warnings. But what they saw defied every principle of naval engagement. They understood the Dominion's will was surrounded, not by ships Zethkar could have dealt with ships, Instead, they were surrounded by a constellation of objects that should have been harmless. Asteroids moved with purpose, their trajectories clearly controlled. Debris fields formed geometric patterns that suggested intelligence behind their positioning. Most disturbing of all, some of the asteroids were clearly inhabited. Sensor readings detected life signs and energy signatures inside rocks that should have been lifeless. How? Was all Zethkar could manage. Chun's image leaned back in his chair, perfectly relaxed despite being in the middle of what should have been an impossible military operation. Commander, let me tell you about human history. We spent 10,000 years learning to fight wars on one small planet. Do you know what that teaches you? Zethkar remained silent, transfixed by the tactical display showing his ship's impossible situation. It teaches you that everything is a weapon if you're creative enough, Chun continued. Rocks become catapults. Water becomes siege engines. Empty space becomes a battlefield. We learn to use terrain, weather, psychology, economics, anything and everything that could give us an advantage. He gestured toward the view screen. And now we've taught our friends the same lessons. The impossible formations around the Dominion's will began to move. And Zethkar realized with growing horror that he was witnessing the implementation of strategies his military training couldn't even comprehend. Ships hit an asteroid shadow? The transport ship Dominion's will cut through the darkness of space like a blade through silk. Inside its sterile corridors, Commander Zethkar of the Hegemony Navy paced with measured steps, his forearms clasped behind his back in perfect military precision. The crystalline formations that served as his eyes reflected the cold blue light of the control panels, and his thoughts were equally cold. Today marked the beginning of what the Hegemony Council called Final Integration Protocol. The last free human colony would finally submit to their rule, just as thousands of other species had done across the galaxy over the past millennium. The Hegemony had perfected the art of conquest through systematic psychological domination rather than crude destruction. Why waste resources when you could simply break a species' will to resist? Zethkar had overseen 47 such integrations during his career. Each followed the same pattern: initial resistance, followed by despair, then acceptance, and finally grateful submission to hegemony superiority. The humans would be no different. Despite their reputation for stubbornness, the colony of New Terra hung before them like a blue-green jewel against the starfield. Intelligence reports indicated a population of roughly 50,000 humans, mostly farmers, engineers, and their families. They had fled here after the conquest of Earth 3 decades ago, thinking distance would protect them. How naive. Commander, the communications officer's voice crackled through his translator implant. The colony is responding to our transmission. Display it, Zethkar commanded. His mandibles clicking with satisfaction, the main screen flickered to life, revealing a human male who appeared to be in his middle years by their species' standards. His hair was graying and lines marked his face, but his eyes held something that made Zethkar pause. There was no fear there, no desperate plea for mercy. Instead, the human looked almost amused. This is Director Marcus Chun of New Terra Colony, the human said, his voice steady and calm. We've received your demands for surrender. I have to say, your timing is interesting. Zethkar's secondary arms twitched. In 4 decades of conquest, no species had ever described their arrival as interesting. Fear, rage, despair, these were the expected responses. Never casual observation. Human Chun, Zethkar replied, allowing his voice to carry the full weight of hegemony authority. You will address me as Supreme Commander. Your colony has 24 standard hours to surrender unconditionally. You will submit to hegemony rule, accept relocation to designated zones, and comply with all productivity requirements. Resistance is futile and will result in unpleasant consequences. The human Chun tilted his head slightly as if considering a mildly interesting puzzle. 24 hours? That's very generous of you, Supreme Commander. Most of your kind usually gives us about 6. Again, that strange response. How did this primitive know anything about standard hegemony protocols? Zethkar's information indicated these humans had been isolated for 30 years. You seem remarkably calm for someone facing the inevitable, Zethkar observed, his voice dropping to the threatening register that had broken the will of countless species leaders. Chun's expression didn't change. If anything, that hint of amusement seemed to deepen. Oh, I wouldn't say it's inevitable. You see, Commander, we've been expecting you for quite some time now. The bridge fell silent except for the hum of life support systems. Zethkar felt something he hadn't experienced in decades in certainty. This conversation was not following the script. None of his integration protocols had prepared him for this response. Expecting us? He repeated slowly. Chun nodded. The refugees from Kepler 442b reached us about 6 months ago. Charming people, the Vectari. Terrible what happened to their homeworld after they surrendered to you. Amazing how quickly their population dropped from 8 billion to 3 million. Once you finished your productivity optimization, Zethkar's 4 arms locked rigidly at his sides. The Vectari integration had been classified at the highest levels. How could isolated humans possibly know about it? You're lying, he stated flatly. Chun shrugged, a peculiarly human gesture that somehow conveyed both indifference and hidden knowledge. The Vectari survivors are in Settlement 7 if you'd like to verify. Fascinating species, they can survive in hard vacuum for short periods. Makes them excellent scouts. The implication hit Zethkar like a plasma bolt to the chest. If the Vectari could survive in space, they could travel between systems without ships. They could carry information. They could spread word of hegemony atrocities across the galaxy. Impossible, Zethkar breathed. Our intelligence networks would have detected your intelligence networks. Chun interrupted gently, are designed to monitor electronic communications and ship movements. They're not particularly good at tracking refugees who can literally swim through the void between stars. For the first time in his career, Zethkar felt the cold touch of genuine surprise. He had built his reputation on knowing everything about his targets before first contact. This human was telling him that his fundamental understanding of the situation was wrong. Even if this is true, Zethkar said, forcing his voice back to its commanding tone, it changes nothing. You have seen what happens to species that resist the hegemony. Surrender, and your deaths will be quick and purposeful. Chun's eyebrows rose slightly. Deaths? Oh, Commander, I think you misunderstand our position here. The human leaned forward slightly, and for the first time, something shifted in his expression. The amusement was still there, but underneath it, Zethkar glimpsed something that made his chitin prickle with unease. Please, enlighten me, Zethkar said carefully. We know about the 47 species you've integrated, Chun said. We know about the productivity quotas that are mathematically impossible to meet. We know about the systematic starvation, the forced breeding programs, the deliberate destruction of cultural heritage. We know that the hegemony doesn't conquer worlds, it harvests them. Each word landed like a physical blow. This information was beyond classified. It was the foundation of hegemony power projection. Fear of the unknown was a crucial weapon, and this human was systematically dismantling it. But most importantly, Chun continued, his voice taking on a tone that Zethkar had never heard before, something warm and dangerous and utterly alien. We know about the hegemony's greatest weakness. Which is? Zethkar found himself asking. Though every instinct screamed that he shouldn't want to know the answer, Chun smiled. It was a simple expression. Barely an upward curve of the lips, but something about it made Zethkar's blood freeze in his veins. He had seen thousands of species across the galaxy. He had witnessed their expressions of fear, rage, despair, and submission. But this smile was none of those things. It was the expression of someone who held cards that hadn't been revealed yet. It was the look of someone who knew something their opponent didn't. Your greatest weakness, Chun said softly. Is that you've never encountered a species that fights back effectively? Impossible, Zethkar snapped. The Corax Imperium resisted for 12 years. The Zephyrian Alliance held out for 8. We have faced and defeated every form of resistance the galaxy can produce. Chun's smile widened just a fraction. Commander, those species fought the way you expected them to fight. Ship to ship, world to world, army to army. They played by rules you understood. Zethkar felt a chill that had nothing to do with the ship's temperature controls. And humans don't. Humans, Chun said, settling back in his chair with an air of someone about to share a treasured secret, learned warfare from the most vicious, unforgiving teacher in the galaxy. We learned it from each other. The communication channel fell silent for long moments. Around the bridge, Zethkar's crew had stopped their normal activities and were staring at the screen with expressions of growing unease. Even with their diverse physiologies, the universal signs of anxiety were unmistakable. "You're attempting to frighten us with empty threats," Zethkar said finally. Though his voice lacked its earlier conviction, Chun chuckled, a sound devoid of humor. "Commander, I haven't made a single threat yet. I'm simply sharing information. The same way the Vectari shared information with us. The same way we've been sharing information with others." "Others? Did you really think you were the only hegemony fleet operating in this sector?" Chun asked mildly. "Your colleagues at Epsilon Eridani received some very interesting data packets last week. As did the garrison at Volf 359. Amazing how quickly news travels when people really want to spread it." Zethkar's mind raced through the implications. If humans had somehow established communication networks across hegemony space without detection, if they were coordinating with other resistance groups, if they had been preparing for this encounter. 24 hours, you said? Chun continued conversationally. That's interesting timing, because in 23 hours and 15 minutes, the Hegemony Council will be receiving some very compelling evidence about the actual state of their outlying territories. Seems there's been quite a lot of unrest recently. Productivity quotas missed, supply convoys delayed, communications blackouts in 17 systems. Each revelation hit Zethkar like a physical blow. The reports he'd been filing, the sanitized summaries that made his sector appear peaceful and productive if the Council learned the truth.